Hi, I'm Bradley Sumrall, curator of the collection for the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, and I'm here with John Barnes, local artist in the New Orleans art scene, as well as a educator at Dillard University. And we're going to have a little conversation about his piece, his work, his career, and his piece in the exhibition, What Music Is Within, Black Abstraction from the Permanent Collection at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Thank you for being with me today, John.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's an honor and a pleasure. And so can you give us a little background about your practice as an artist? Where did it all begin? How did you get where you are?
Well, I knew I had some creative abilities early on. I was drawing before I was writing, and it's something that's always been with me. I've always been the kid drawing in the class when I was in school. And you know, I would go a lot further with it than most of my peers. And after a while, I really started to find a lot of power in my ability to express myself that way. And so I'm an academic, a lifelong academic. So I went through the basic channels of K through 12, and then I went to Southern University. And that was a major turning point for me because I met Martin Payton. He's an incredible sculptor, and he was the chair of the art department at Southern at the time when I was there. And Martin noticed things about me and my work ethic, and you know, he would throw a scrap at me here and there. And I started looking to Martin as my role model and example of what a real artist is. Baton Rouge at the time, we've always had artists in Baton Rouge. I'm from Baton Rouge. I moved to New Orleans 21 years ago, but at that time we didn't have the level of exposure in our art community as the New Orleans art community. So it was, you know, he was my first glimpse into that world. And the discipline and the focus and the exhibitions, I found myself going to New Orleans more and more, not only to support Martin, but to see if there's something there for me, you know. And so from there, I went to graduate school, Memphis College of Art, and I received an MFA in sculpture and digital art. Unfortunately, the school closed a year and a half ago. But from there, I went to the Tougaloo Art Colony. Tougaloo is a small HBCU in Jackson, Mississippi. And at that time, we're talking like 99, 2000, they had a very vibrant Black artists retreat. And I went there as an intern, and that's where I met Cheryl Dixon. She was the former department chair of art at Dillard, and she invited me there to work, which was my introduction to the city. So since then, I've shown at a very, very established gallery. I showed at Lemieux Galleries for 10 years. And since then, I've been on my own as a independent artist. I'm not gallery represented. I operate as a business. But I do show in group shows and exhibitions at trusted galleries in the area. Now, in terms of I can keep going or.
Yeah, we're good. You know, I just want to say I can't think of a better role model for anybody on the face of the planet than Martin Payton. He's one of the most graceful, elegant, wise people I know. I'm impressed that I'm not surprised that he was a big inspiration from me. But let me ask you a little something about Tougaloo. When you were at the art colony at Tougaloo, did you happen to meet or study under Arlington Weathers?
No, I didn't. It was a 1-week artist colony. And at that artist colony, I met Benny Andrews.
No way.
I met Richard Hunt. I met quite a few major artists of that particular era. And it was a very rich mix of artists from all over the country and different parts of the Caribbean and South America. So it was a really a wonderful incubator. A major artist who arrived at that art colony with me was a woman named Torquasi Dyson. She just had a major show at NOMA. She comes out of that Tougaloo group. As well as I have a colleague, he does incredible digital work, and he's now based in Korea, a guy named Roy Legrone. So we were like, many of us have gone on to have established careers, regional, national, local, international. So it was a really good mix.
Well, Benny Andrews, of course, is was our first artist in residence, was our first artist member of the board, and was an artist who helped really set the trajectory of the museum. The Ogden Museum has the largest public collection of his work, and he helped define our mission. So that's amazing. I consider him one of America's greatest artists, and that's amazing that you met him at Tougaloo. And that department, that program, has been so strong and so powerful for many, many years. And Arlington Weathers, who's also included in this exhibition at the Ogden that you're in, was a visiting artist at the Tougaloo Art Colony for over 20 years, I believe.
Right.
And that is his connection with the South, because he's originally from Guyana and lives in New York City. But the work in our permanent collection comes from out of his time spent at Tougaloo and his deep connection to Jackson, Mississippi, and that program. So there's a lot of, it's always amazing to me when I talk to artists. The Southern art, the art world in general is small enough, but when you break it down into art of the American South, it becomes very, very small world.
Yes. Yeah. It really is. It really is.
Which is exciting for a curator, because you get to see all of those connections, those moments of influence and inspiration between artists.
And what's really wonderful, Bradley, is I actually have a handwritten letter from Benny Andrews. After we met at the artist colony, he sent me a letter about 2 months later. And I still have that. And just the brilliance of his handwriting, okay?
Oh my God.
Unmatched.
Yeah.
Unmatched.
Well, his drawings, I want to get back to your work very quickly, but those beautiful, delicate drawings that he did,
yes.
He did those with what's called a crow-quill pen, which was a mass-produced dip nib pen with a very fine nib. So it wasn't even a fountain feed or anything. It was a dip pen. And that he could create these big sweeping lines with so much confidence with a nib pen blows me away.
That is very big.
But let's get back to your work. And I know that in one of your artist statements, I saw that the city of New Orleans plays a role. How much of a role does the city of New Orleans, its people and its culture, play into your work?
It plays in quite heavily. I mean, I live in New Orleans, and there's no way I can live in a place that is so visual. It's a very visual city. Oftentimes, people who are from here, they're so used to it, they don't really notice it until they go and spend some time in the Midwest, and they see that there's a huge difference, right? So anyway, since I'm a New Orleans-based artist, I'm in the community. I teach at a historically Black college, Dillard University. I'm active in the Black community, and oftentimes I overhear things, and little bits of influence pop up here and there. I absolutely fell in love with the housing, the low economic housing, and the different ways those houses would be held together. That was the most important thing for me aesthetically. I was just in awe of how they were holding these homes together with screws and nails and misshapen pieces of wood, and how it just all flowed so incredibly tastefully. It didn't have a choppy look. It looked very much like whoever was doing this to these homes, they had an understanding of some basic general understanding of composition and placement. And I found that to be just kind of hypnotizing. And so that was something that I wanted to immediately invest in my work. And in terms of the idioms that are spoken in the communities, and how simple descriptions of activities are loaded with content. I mean, they're loaded with intent. They're loaded with context. They're loaded with identity. And so when I heard the term Doh Pop, and I can't really remember where I was when I heard it, but it rung in my head. And it was a much older woman who said it. I can't remember exactly where I was, if I was standing in line at the grocery store or, paying a bill or something, but it was definitely a real thing. And I was like, wow, and what led to me investing it in a work is that different things catch my attention. Anything that reflects light, that catches my attention. Okay, so one day I just happened to be walking past some blinds, in my laundry room, and I caught it at a time when the light was moving through the blinds, and it almost had a light table effect with the blinds. I'm like, wow, it just totally took my breath away. I said, that's what I'm making next. And so simultaneously, the dough popping term popped up. It's just like all these things came together at once. It's like, wow,
Well, for people who don't know that that phrase, can you explain what dough popping is for them?
Well, dough popping is simply a way of describing someone looking out of a window, usually to spy on someone, or to just be nosy, just sit on the phone and look out the window. And there's this level of not wanting to be discovered. If something happens while they're looking outside, they close the blinds right quick. But this is something that happens in neighborhoods and communities everywhere. But in this particular city, where the primary culture is Black, it really plays out in a very different way. It plays out in a very it's so matter of fact. You know what I mean? It's so matter of fact. It's like, wow, you packed all of that into those two words. Now,
well, I can say that as someone who lives in a traditional Black community in New Orleans, and I'm lucky that my particular block in America's oldest Black neighborhood is still Black. With it's always been mixed, but it's still predominantly Black. And there are some matriarchs on the street, and one matriarch in particular is always at that door. She knows everybody's business. You can't buy a different can of beans without Mamoon knowing what's going on. So it really rang true to me too when I saw that piece, and I understood.
Right, because the neighborhood elder, it's part of their responsibility to know everybody and what they're doing. But it's not necessarily their responsibility that everybody knows that they're doing it.
We all know.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm going to share the screen so that we can talk a little more. So we have a visual, and we can talk a little more about, from beginning. Let's do that. There we go. And there's the piece, Doh Poppin' 2. So we've talked about the narrative, and so you approach this piece with the idea of blinds and the light coming through the blinds, and this idea of pulling the blinds down a little bit to view through the blinds, like the matriarchs of the community would do, the dough poppin'. That's where you get your title. But let's talk a little bit more, you've already mentioned this a little bit, about your choice of materials and the way you approach this composition.
Certainly. What you're looking at with the dough popping piece, you're looking at 3 different types of wood. First, you're looking at a very basic piece of plywood, and there is a little bit of history behind the plywood. This plywood, we hosted a Prospect.1 event at Dillard University in our gallery. And one of the Prospect.1 artists, a gentleman by the name of William Cordova, insisted on covering up the carpet floor with plywood. So as he left, he left all of that wood behind. So I gathered it up, and it had a nice pattern, and it was not pristine plywood. It had trails and, little bits of dust and ephemera on it from all of the human traffic on it. So those are the type of things that I would use if I know I'm going to use a more refined type of wood. I really want contrast at every moment. So the plywood, which is the wood surface that's furthest away from the viewer, my goal of usage with that was to create like a cloud field, a cloud form, or an impression of one from the wood grain in the plywood. And then from there, I built it up with, I built the actual abstraction of blinds using red oak. And the reason that I used the red oak, I did want it to be a hardwood piece. And red oak, it in its untreated state, in my opinion, is very, it seems to accrete shadows, versus if there's a surface on it where the shadows are pushed out, it accretes, it pulls you in. So that was the effect that I was looking for with it. I didn't want any shiny surfaces. I wanted it to be a piece where you're only getting the actual real reflection of the materials. At the same time, the shadows and recessed spaces that exist inside the composition, okay, they're more they're pushed out. I mean, they absorb in more than push out. So that was the main technical usage for it. And there's also pencil marks and screws. These are design elements or steps that many artists would, either bury in the artistry, or they would try to, erase or eliminate. But the type of artwork that I'm most drawn to, it always has a pretty deliberate pathway to how the artist was thinking and making decisions. So as I mentioned before, Benny Andrews, many of his compositions, you can see the guidelines, the pencil guidelines and drawing in the drawing of the composition before he painted. You could see those undermarks, as well as another one of my favorite artists, John Biggers. John Biggers' compositions show a lot of underdrawing, and that's something that I also the way that I work. I don't do traditional woodworking where I'm joining everything and trying to hide all of the artistry. I want the artistry to be fully, not the artistry, my decision making to be fully on display, because part of the style of abstraction that I'm working with this particular piece is based on very quick decisions. And that's why we have all of these random angles. We have some areas of that appear to be stacked, some areas that almost appear to be collapsed. So just think about a really beat up set of blinds, and they create lots of opportunity if you convert it into another material.
That's beautiful. I love that you get a feeling of human engagement with that back panel, with those mark making, as well as maybe a little history to the wood, and that contrast with the kind of pristine red oak above it. So you're taking into account formal elements of the composition, as well as narrative and biographical elements. And in this piece, you really have this sense of both harmony and rhythm, but also dissonance and chaos a little bit there. And that's something that you could make musical connections with, but just formally, I think it had something in common with another piece or two in the exhibition. And so I'll share those. This is how the piece situates itself in the exhibition at the Ogden right now. And you're hanging next to two painters, but yet, especially with the Robert Reed piece in the middle, there's a real resonance between those two pieces. What do you see when you, what did you think when you saw the installation, and what do you see that connects your work to these other two works?
I thought it was a great selection of objects to have grouped together. It would have been an obvious decision, because we use a lot of triangles and horizontals and various geometric patterning. And it's interesting, since his are painterly marks, the distance from one side of the composition to the next is very controlled. Now, the contrast to my work is the groupings are less controlled, and as you said, a little bit more chaotic. But he creates his chaos in part with color. I use exclusively shapes, but there's only so many conclusions you're going to have, believe it or not. There's only so many conclusions you're going to have. If you're working in this angular geometric way, there's only so many patternings that you can come up with. So for me, my work is sort of the main difference between my work and that work is I'm actually dealing with, I want my abstraction to be based on something physical that has somewhat of a relationship to where I'm at to place. Because, these works are different eras. And so, sense of place is very important to contemporary work. So in his day, it was more, the sense of place was more about your head, where your head is at. Now, what's also interesting, there's a circular piece in his upper left-hand composition that has a line through it. It looks very much like a flathead screw. So I did find that to be kind of funny, you know what I mean? But the way he uses small circular spaces is very similar to how the patterning that just so happens to occur with the screws.
Well, I think, formally, maybe your works resonates more with the Eugene Martin piece that's very clean and less chaotic. But what I love about the connection between these two pieces is that you are bringing in narrative and place, believe it or not. And I'll give you a little background on the Robert Reed piece, is that the San Romano series was inspired by Paolo Uccelli's Battle of San Romano from the mid-15th century that he saw at the Met. And that those kind of the chaos of war. So those are kind of the chaos of those lances crossing and the chaos of war there. But then Monticello brick comes from Monticello, Jefferson Davis's house. And Robert Reed is, the great, the first Black tenured professor at Yale and a great educator for, I think, over 40 years at Yale University, studied under Joseph Albers. But he's from Charlottesville, Virginia, and he grew up visiting this place, Monticello, Jefferson Davis's home. And so there is that in both pieces, there's autobiographical information. The checkerboard that his son gave him is in there, as well as sense of place with Monticello and New Orleans, and this kind of resonating rhythm and dissonance and harmony that both pieces have, but then coming from completely different perspectives and using completely different materials. But I'm in awe that you both came to such successful compositions independently that resonate. And that happens often in the art world.
Now, what's interesting, Bradley, if you were to take a straight edge and you were to line it up with the I guess the bottom of the blinds in my piece, it would immediately move across to the orange line at the exact same angle in the Robert Reed composition. It's like I'm amazed at how many similar decisions were made in terms of telling our stories. It is a good grouping, definitely.
Well, that was pretty much all the questions I had for you today. But do you have anything to add to this or anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. I would say, it's a great exhibition, and I think everyone should see it. And I feel very honored to have been included in it and to be paired with such incredible artists. And I think it's a great curatorial effort.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor for the Ogden to have this piece in the permanent collection. And I have to thank Brooke Davis Anderson for that gift that came out of her. I think she was a juror for Louisiana Contemporary the year that you entered your work, and I believe she gave you top prize and then placed this piece in the Ogden's collection. So I have to thank Brooke Davis Anderson for that. And indeed, I think it's a good exhibition from the permanent collection, and your work stands really, all of the work is really strong, but your work stands really strong. And that moment of those three artists, Eugene Martin, Robert Reed and John Barnes was a very happy moment for me when that room came together. I loved seeing those pieces together. They were more successful. They spoke to it together. They were each stronger than independent. It seemed like they really spoke to each other so well. So this exhibition, What Music Is Within, Black Abstraction from the Permanent Collection, is up through the month of July, I believe till August 3rd. So please come and see it if you can. And John, I hope you get to visit again before it comes down.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, you can learn more about John Barnes on his website. Just Google John Barnes Artist. It's the first thing that pops up. And you can also see more about the exhibition with images of all the work in the exhibition, including artists like Sam Gilliam, Ron Bechet, Jeffrey Cook, etc. It's a wonderful show on the Ogden Museum's website. So visit www.ogdenmuseum.org for more information. And thanks again, John, for being with us.
Thanks very much, Bradley.